Hashtag Alien Girl said, "Everyone's afraid of me," but Human just smiled. The station hung in the void like a forgotten ornament, suspended between distant nebulae that cast their weak, multicolored light through portholes and cracks in the hull. Once perhaps a mining outpost or research facility, its purpose had long been forgotten, leaving only the cold metal corridors, thick with cosmic dust, and life support systems that hummed at minimal capacity. The silence here was absolute, broken only by the occasional ping of settling metal or the soft whir of an ancient maintenance robot making its rounds. This was Lyra's domain, her sanctuary and her prison. She moved through the corridors with the fluid grace of someone who had memorized every panel and crevice, her footsteps making barely a sound on the metal flooring. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, intricate patterns shifting across its surface like luminescent tattoos responding to her emotions, currently a soft blue tinged with the purple of solitude. Her eyes, multifaceted like those of an earth insect, but infinitely more complex, reflected the sparse light in prismatic bursts. When she moved quickly, additional appendages sometimes unfurled from beneath her shoulder blades. Not quite wings, not quite arms, but something uniquely suited to her physiology. These were the features that made others recoil, that made them fear. Lyra settled into her makeshift observation deck, a collection of scavenged cushions and blankets positioned near a large window that looked out into the endless void. She couldn't remember how long she had been alone here. Time seemed irrelevant when days were measured only by the artificial lighting cycle. Her mind drifted, as it often did during these quiet moments, to the memories that had shaped her existence. She remembered the widening of pupils, the quickening of breath, the instinctive step backward that every sentient being seemed to take when they first saw her. Even among her own kind, she had been different, too bright, too sensitive, too intense. The incident at the colony, when her bioluminescence had flared uncontrollably during an emotional outburst, overloading nearby systems and causing a temporary but frightening blackout, had been the final straw. She hadn't meant to cause harm, but intentions mattered little against results. After that, isolation seemed the only option. Here, at least, she couldn't frighten anyone. Her only companions were the station's ancient maintenance robots, simple constructs that showed neither fear nor affection, and the strange non-sentient life forms that occasionally drifted through the area, cosmic jellyfish and stellar plankton that fed on radiation and space dust. "Better this way," she whispered to herself, her voice carrying the subtle harmonic undertones characteristic of her species. Better alone than feared. A sudden, violent tremor shook the station, throwing Lyra from her nest of blankets. This was no ordinary settling of the station's old infrastructure. This was impact. She scrambled to her feet, her skin flashing alarm red as she moved swiftly to the nearest functioning terminal. The station's sensors, ancient but functional, showed a small transport vessel had collided with the outer rim of the station. Not a direct hit, but close enough to cause damage to both the station and the vessel. Lyra's heart raced, her skin pulsing with anxiety. Someone was here. Someone living, breathing, thinking, someone who could see her, fear her. Should she hide? The station was large enough that she could conceivably avoid detection until the visitor left or perished. The thought sent a wave of shame through her. No, whatever their reason for being here, she couldn't leave someone to die if they needed help. She monitored the sensors, watching as the small craft managed a controlled emergency landing in one of the station's long-abandoned docking bays. The ship's design was unmistakably human, practical, somewhat inelegant, but sturdy. Probably a freelance transport or trading vessel, the kind that operated on the fringes of established space lanes. Lyra kept her distance, observing through the station surveillance system as the ship's hatch finally opened with a hiss of equalized pressure. A figure emerged, and Lyra felt her breath catch. A human, a male, from what she could discern. He was of average height for his species, with a build that suggested strength, tempered by the slight leanness of someone who didn't always have regular meals. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had seen too much of the universe too quickly, with lines around the eyes that spoke of squinting against alien suns. His hair was short and dark, with flecks of premature gray at the temples, and he moved with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems on his own. Captain Kalen Vance, Kai to the few he might call friends, surveyed the damage to his ship with a practiced eye, and a string of colorful curses. The landing thrusters had taken the worst of it, and the hull had a nasty gash along the starboard side. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a smudge of engine oil across his forehead, and sighed heavily. "Fine mess you've gotten yourself into, Vance," he muttered to himself, voice echoing slightly in the cavernous docking bay. He pulled out a handheld scanner, checking the atmosphere. Breathable if a bit stale. Gravity at 0.9 standard. Temperature cool, but tolerable. At least he wouldn't die immediately. That was something. What he needed now were parts, or at least materials he could jury-rig into repairs. And soon, his ship's sensors had picked up warning signs of instability in this section of the station. Some kind of slow-building radiation leak from an old reactor core, if he had a guess. Nothing immediately lethal, but he'd rather not stick around long enough to test his radiation meds. Lyra watched him from the shadows as he methodically explored the area around the docking bay, collecting odd bits of metal and tools, muttering to himself all the while. There was something oddly comforting about his presence, the way he approached his situation with neither panic nor resignation, just a sort of practical determination. She followed him silently through the corridors, staying just out of sight, curiosity slowly overriding caution. When he began moving toward the sector where she had her primary living area, Lyra felt panic rising. He was getting too close to her sanctuary, where evidence of her existence would be impossible to hide. Part of her, a small, lonely part that had been silenced for too long, wondered what would happen if she allowed herself to be discovered. Would this human's reaction be the same as all the others? Kai paused at an intersection, studying his scanner with a frown. Something was interfering with the readings, energy signatures that didn't match the station's baseline. He adjusted the settings, trying to isolate the anomaly, when a flicker of movement caught his eye. "Hello," he called out, his hand automatically moving to the blaster at his hip. "I know someone's there. Look, I'm not looking for trouble. My ship's damaged, and I could use some help." Silence. "I've got supplies to trade if that helps," he continued, taking a cautious step toward where he'd seen the movement. "Food, medicine, even some decent synth alcohol, if that's your preference." Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her skin dimming to near darkness in an instinctive attempt at camouflage. But it was too late. He was following her trail now, moving steadily closer to where she hid. She could run, find another hiding place, lead him away from her living quarters, or she could face him directly, control the encounter. Before she could decide, fate made the choice for her. A section of damaged flooring gave way under her weight with a groan of protesting metal. Not enough to send her plummeting to a lower level, but enough to create a noise that echoed through the corridor and froze them both in place. Kai's blaster was in his hand now, pointed in her direction, but not directly at her. A precaution rather than a threat. "I know you're there," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Come out where I can see you, and we can talk this through like civilized beings." Lyra closed her multifaceted eyes for a moment, steeling herself. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped out from the shadows. She watched his face carefully, waiting for the familiar signs, the widening eyes, the step backward, the hand tightening on the weapon. But instead, his expression showed only mild surprise, then thoughtful assessment. No fear, no disgust. "You should leave," she said, her voice carrying its strange harmonic quality that often unsettled other species. "Everyone is afraid of me." Kai looked up from the sparking control panel he'd been examining, his face smudged with engine oil and cosmic dust. His eyes, a deep brown that reminded Lyra of the rich soil samples she'd once studied, moved over her unusual features with calm appraisal. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth curved upward in a tired, lopsided smile. "Right now, I'm more afraid of this damn engine blowing us both to atoms he replied dryly. You wouldn't happen to have anything to drink around here, would you? Preferably something stronger than recycled water. Lyra blinked, her skin flickering through colors of confusion. This was not how these encounters were supposed to go. She had revealed herself, stated the fundamental truth of her existence, that she was something to be feared, and this human had simply ignored it, proceeded as if she were any ordinary being. Did you not hear me? She asked, taking an unconscious step forward. I said, I heard you, Kai interrupted, turning his attention back to the panel. And I'm not saying you're wrong. Maybe everyone else is afraid of you. But right now, I've got bigger problems than being scared of the only other sentient being on this derelict station. A shower of sparks punctuated his words, causing him to jerk his hand back with a curse. Like this jury-rigged piece of garbage that's supposed to regulate my ship's coolant system. Lyra stood frozen, completely thrown off balance by his reaction. This was not in her experience, not part of the script she had rehearsed in her mind during countless imagined encounters. She didn't know how to proceed. A warning alarm sounded from the direction of Kai's ship, a harsh, blaring sound that cut through the station's usual silence. That's not good, Kai muttered, abandoning the panel and rushing toward the docking bay. Without thinking, Lyra followed. The ship's engines were emitting an ominous blue glow, with tendrils of energy arcing dangerously between components. Kai swore under his breath as he checked the readings on a portable device. Coolant leak is worse than I thought, he explained, seemingly not surprised that Lyra had followed him. If I don't stabilize it soon, we're looking at a cascade failure that'll take out half this section of the station. I know where there might be compatible parts, Lyra found herself saying, the words coming almost without conscious thought. The station had similar systems in the maintenance section. Kai looked at her with new interest. Lead the way, then. I'm Kai, by the way. Kalen Vance officially, but nobody calls me that except customs officers and people trying to kill me. Lyra, she replied simply, then turned and moved with swift precision through the corridors, her luminescent patterns shifting to a focused amber as she led them toward a rarely visited section of the station. The maintenance section was dark, but Lyra's natural bioluminescence provided enough light for them to see. She moved confidently among the old equipment, pointing out components that might be useful. You know your way around here pretty well, Kai commented as he carefully extracted a coolant regulator that looked promising. How long have you been on this station? Lyra hesitated and used a casual conversation. A long time, she finally answered. I don't keep precise count anymore. Kai nodded, accepting her vague answer without pressing further. Alone all that time, she nodded, then realized he might not be able to see the gesture clearly in the dim light. Yes, it's safer that way. For who? He asked, his tone mild as he tested the components' connections. The question caught her off guard. For others, of course. Kai made a non-committal sound as he finished collecting the parts he needed. Let's get back to the ship before this thing decides to blow. The repair work was intricate and demanded both their attention. Despite her initial reservation, Lyra found herself working alongside Kai with increasing comfort, passing tools, holding components steady as he made adjustments, even offering suggestions based on her knowledge of the station systems. They worked in a surprisingly comfortable silence, broken only by occasional requests for tools or brief explanations of what needed to be done next. By the time they had the coolant system stabilized, several hours had passed. Kai straightened, wincing as he worked out a kink in his back, and wiped his hands on an already stained cloth. That should hold it, at least long enough to get somewhere with proper repair facilities, he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. He glanced at Lyra. I appreciate the help. Couldn't have done it this quickly without you. Lyra's skin rippled with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify, something between pride and embarrassment. Your approach was efficient, she said, which was as close to a compliment as she could manage. Kai chuckled, a sound that Lyra found surprisingly pleasant. High praise, I'm sure. He glanced around the docking bay. Now, you mentioned something about a drink earlier? They settled in a small area near Lyra's living quarters. Not quite inside her sanctuary, but close enough that she could retrieve a container of synthesized fruit beverage and After some consideration, a bottle of distilled alcohol she had acquired long ago and never found a use for. Kai accepted the drink gratefully, taking a cautious sip before nodding with approval. Not bad, he commented. Better than the engine, coolant some outposts try to pass off as liquor. A strange silence fell between them. Not the comfortable working silence from before, but something weighted with unasked questions. So, Kai finally said, swirling the amber liquid in his makeshift cup, "Want to tell me why you think everyone's afraid of you?" Lyra's patterns shifted to a defensive blue. "It's not what I think. It's what I know. Based on what evidence?" The directness of his question caught her off guard again. Based on experience, on reactions, on an incident that... She trailed off, unsure how to continue. Kai waited, neither pushing nor retreating, simply allowing her the space to find her words. "My species has certain abilities," she finally continued. "Bioluminescence is the most obvious, but there are others. We can influence electromagnetic fields, sense energy patterns. In certain emotional states, these abilities can become unpredictable." She described the incident at the colony, how her distress during a conflict had triggered an uncontrolled surge in her abilities, causing systems to fail, creating panic. No one had been seriously hurt, but the fear in their eyes afterward, not just humans but members of her own species, had told her everything she needed to know. "So you decided to exile yourself to this abandoned station," Kai concluded, "rather than risk frightening anyone else." Put so plainly, it sounded almost absurd. But Lyra nodded. It seemed the kindest choice. Kai took another sip of his drink. "I've been flying solo for about 7 years now," he said, seemingly changing the subject. "Not entirely by choice at first. Had a crew, good people, mostly, but we had a run-in with some corporate security forces while carrying cargo that wasn't, strictly speaking, on the manifest." He described a life spent moving between stars, taking jobs that skirted the edges of legality, meeting beings from dozens of worlds. The loneliness of long space flights, the brief connections in crowded spaceports, the constant vigilance required when every new face could belong to someone looking to collect a bounty. "Point is," he concluded, "space is vast and strange, and I've seen things that make your light show seem downright ordinary. Hell, I once delivered cargo to a being that existed as a colony of gas-filled sacks that communicated by controlled explosions. Nearly blew my eyebrows off saying hello." Lyra's skin flickered with something like amusement. "I'm not saying your abilities couldn't be dangerous in the wrong circumstances," Kai continued. "But from what I've seen, you've got better control than you give yourself credit for." As if on cue, the lights in the corridor flickered. Lyra's patterns dimmed immediately in response, an automatic adjustment she had developed to reduce her energy output when the station's system seemed strained. "See?" Kai gestured at her. "That right there. Conscious control. It's different when I'm calm," Lyra countered. "When there's no threat, no intense emotion." "Like now, you mean?" "Having a drink with a strange human who crashed into your home." Lyra blinked, realizing he had a point. Despite the unprecedented nature of the situation, she felt remarkably steady. Before she could respond, a more serious alarm began to sound. Not from Kai's ship this time, but from the station itself. Lyra's skin pulsed with alarm as she moved quickly to the nearest functioning terminal. "The radiation leak," she said, scanning the readouts. "It's accelerating. This entire section will be contaminated within hours." Kai moved to look over her shoulder, his expression grim. "That fits with what my ship's sensors were showing earlier. We need to move it away from the leak source or seal it off somehow." "The old reactor core is 3 levels down," Lyra explained. "But the containment systems failed years ago. I've avoided that section entirely." "Smart move," Kai agreed. "Any way to seal it off more completely? Emergency bulkheads or something similar?" Lyra hesitated. "There's a manual override for the sector bulkheads, but it would require someone to be in the control room adjacent to the reactor level. The radiation levels there would be significant." "How significant are we talking?" "Lethal without proper protection." Kai rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "My ship has a radiation suit, but it's seen better days. Might buy enough time to engage the bulkheads, though. Or we could try to reach the emergency evacuation shuttles, Lyra suggested. There might still be one functional. How far? Other side of the station. We'd have to hurry. They gathered what supplies they could, Kai grabbing essential tools and components from his ship, while Lyra collected the few possessions she truly valued, mostly data crystals containing research and observations from her years on the station. They moved swiftly through the corridors, Lyra leading them through shortcuts and maintenance tunnels she had discovered over the years. As they approached a junction between sectors, a deep, groaning sound reverberated through the station. Moments later, a section of ceiling collapsed, blocking their path with twisted metal and debris. Structural integrities failing faster than anticipated, Lyra said, her patterns pulsing with urgency. The radiation must be affecting the support systems. Is there another way around? Kai asked, already scanning for alternatives. Yes, but it's longer. We might not make it to the shuttles in time. Kai's expression hardened with determination. Then we go with Plan A. Get to the control room, seal off the reactor section, buy ourselves time to reach the shuttles, or repair my ship enough for emergency launch. Lyra's patterns flashed with alarm. The radiation levels. I'll wear the suit, Kai said firmly. You guide me from a safer distance. That won't work, Lyra countered. The controls are complex, specific to this station's design. I need to be there to operate them correctly. They stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Then we share the suit, Kai suggested. It's oversized on me anyway. Lyra shook her head. My physiology is different. Your suit wouldn't provide adequate protection for me. She hesitated, then added quietly, but I might not need it as much as you would. What do you mean? My species has some natural radiation resistance. It's not unlimited, but it might buy me enough time to activate the bulkheads. Kai frowned. That sounds like a hell of a risk. Do we have a better option? The station groaned again, as if to emphasize their dwindling choices. I don't like it, Kai said finally, but I don't see another way that gets us both out alive. They changed direction, moving toward the reactor control room. The closer they got, the more warning signs Lyra's body gave her. A tingling sensation across her skin, her patterns shifting involuntarily toward the ultraviolet end of the spectrum in response to the increased radiation. The control room door was sealed, but Lyra quickly bypassed the security with practiced ease. Inside, the air felt heavy, charged with invisible danger. Displays flickered with warning messages, showing radiation levels far into the red zone. I need to access the main control panel, Lyra said, moving toward a complex array of instruments. The bulkhead override sequence is complicated, designed to prevent accidental activation. Kai stayed near the door, his expression tense but resolute. Tell me what to do. Monitor that display, she instructed, pointing to a screen showing a schematic of the station. If the radiation levels in this room exceed the third warning threshold, we need to leave immediately, regardless of whether I've completed the sequence. She began working, her fingers moving across controls with practiced precision. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional beep of the systems and Lyra's quiet explanations of what she was doing. The station shuddered again, more violently this time. One of the overhead panels came loose, crashing down dangerously close to Lyra. She dodged instinctively, but the movement caused her to knock against a critical control, disrupting the sequence she had been carefully building. No, she gasped, watching as the system began to reset itself. No, no, no. What happened? Kai demanded, moving closer despite the danger. I lost the sequence, Lyra explained, her patterns flashing with distress. The system is resetting. We have to start over, but faster this time. The radiation levels are rising more quickly now, Kai warned, glancing at the display. We're already approaching the second threshold. Lyra's hands shook slightly as she restarted the sequence, the radiation beginning to affect even her more resistant physiology. She forced herself to focus, to remember the complex series of commands needed to activate the emergency bulkheads. Another violent tremor shook the station. This time, a support beam gave way, crashing down directly toward the control panel. Without thinking, Lyra raised her hands, her patterns flaring with sudden, intense light. The beam stopped in midair. Kai stared, wide-eyed, as the massive metal object hung, suspended mere inches above the delicate controls that represented their only hope of survival. Lyra stood beneath it, her entire body glowing with power, the patterns on her skin moving in complex, rapid sequences. "Lyra," Kai said carefully, "that's impressive." She couldn't spare the concentration to respond. Using her electrokinetic abilities at this level took every ounce of focus she possessed. Slowly, meticulously, she moved the beam aside, settling it on the floor with a controlled thud. The effort left her gasping, her patterns flickering weakly. "I need to finish the sequence," she managed, turning back to the controls even as her vision swam. "The radiation's nearly at the third threshold," Kai warned, his voice tight with concern. "Lyra, we need to go." "Almost done," she insisted, forcing her trembling fingers to continue their work. "Just need to confirm the command." The final confirmation required simultaneous activation of two separated controls, a safeguard against accidental triggering. In her weakened state, Lyra couldn't reach both. "The right panel," she gasped, pointing. "Press and hold. The red sequence. When I signal." Kai moved to the indicated panel without hesitation, his hand hovering over the controls. "Ready." Lyra positioned herself at the main console, gathering her remaining strength. "Now." They activated the controls simultaneously. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the deck plates, the emergency bulkheads began to close throughout the reactor section. "We did it," Lyra breathed, watching the confirmation lights blink green across the schematic. "The bulkheads are sealing. Now we get out of here," Kai said firmly, moving to support her as she swayed on her feet. "Before we both get cooked." The journey back through the station was a blur for Lyra. The radiation exposure had weakened her significantly, her patterns dim and sluggish, her normally graceful movements reduced to a stumbling gait supported largely by Kai's steady grip. But the station's groaning had subsided, the violent tremors replaced by the occasional minor shudder as the structure stabilized. They reached Kai's ship, which had suffered some additional damage during the structural instability but remained fundamentally space-worthy. Kai helped Lyra inside, settling her in the co-pilot seat before hurrying through pre-flight checks. "The docking clamps are still engaged," he muttered, scanning the controls. "Can't disengage them from here with the station's systems in this state." "Manual override," Lyra said weakly. "External panel, near the main airlock." Kai looked at her with concern. "You're in no shape to go back out there." "I don't need to," she replied, summoning what strength she had left. "I can't. From here." She raised a trembling hand, her skin beginning to glow once more, fainter than before, but with the same focused intent. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her electromagnetic senses, finding the circuits that controlled the docking clamps, tracing them to their source. With a decisive pulse of energy that left her gasping, she triggered the release mechanism. The ship shuddered as the clamps disengaged. "Got it," Kai confirmed, immediately engaging the thrusters. "Hang on." The ship pulled away from the station, maneuvering carefully through the debris field that surrounded it before gaining enough distance for a proper engine burn. Through the viewport, Lyra watched as the only home she had known for years receded into the distance, a dark, broken shape against the star-studded void. "Where to now?" Kai asked quietly, once they had reached a safe distance and the engines had settled into a steady rhythm. Lyra hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. The question loomed large in the small cockpit, representing not just a choice of destination, but a fundamental decision about her future. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I haven't been anywhere else in a very long time." Kai nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've got a delivery scheduled at Outpost Vega, independent trading colony, mix of species, generally mind their own business types. Could drop you there if you want." Or, he hesitated, then continued with careful nonchalance. Could use an extra hand on the ship, if you're interested. Nothing permanent, just until you figure out your next move. Pay would be a percentage of whatever jobs we pick up. Lyra blinked, her patterns shifting to a questioning lavender. You would want me on your ship? After seeing what I can do? Kid, what I saw back, there was you saving both our lives. Kai replied firmly. That beam would have crushed the controls, and we'd be radiation soup by now. As far as I'm concerned, your abilities are an asset, not a liability. But what if I lose control? What if? We'll deal with it, Kai interrupted. That's what people do when they work together. They figure things out as they go. He shrugged. Besides, my clientele tends toward the unusual. Your light show might actually help negotiations in some cases. Lyra fell silent, considering. The station had been safe, in its way, predictable, contained, familiar. But it had also been lonely, stagnant, a self-imposed prison built from fear. She remembered the moment in the control room, when she had stopped the falling beam. There had been fear then, yes, fear of failure, fear of the danger they faced. But there had also been something else. Purpose, connection, the certainty that her abilities were needed rather than feared. And Kai had not recoiled. Not from her appearance, not from her abilities, not even when those abilities manifested in their most dramatic form. Instead, he had simply accepted them as part of who she was, neither more nor less significant than any other aspect of her being. I'll come with you, she decided, her patterns brightening slightly with the first hints of anticipation. At least until Outpost Vega. Then we can reassess. Kai nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Fair enough. He made some adjustments to their course, then reached into a compartment beneath the console. Here, not the finest quality, but it'll help with the radiation effects. He handed her a small flask containing an amber liquid. Lyra accepted it gingerly, taking a cautious sip. The taste was sharp and medicinal, but not entirely unpleasant. Anti-radiation cocktail, Kai explained. Picked it up from a chemist on Drexel 4. Works on most humanoid physiologies. Thank you, Lyra said, the words encompassing more than just the medicine. Kai seemed to understand. He simply nodded, turning his attention back to the ship's controls with that same easy acceptance he had shown from the moment they met. As the ship accelerated toward the nearest jump point, Lyra gazed out at the stars, not through the filtered, dust-covered portholes of the station, but directly, clearly, from the cockpit of a functional vessel. They looked different somehow, brighter, more numerous, more full of possibility. The fear was still there, humming beneath the surface of her thoughts. Fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, fear of her own potential for unintended harm. But alongside it now was something new, a small, fragile spark of hope. Hope that perhaps there were others like Kai out there, beings who could look at her and see not a threat, but simply another traveler in the vast, strange universe they all shared. Kai handed her a steaming cup of something that smelled faintly herbal. Navigation computer says we've got about 6 hours until the jump point, he said casually. Might as well get comfortable. Lyra accepted the cup, her patterns shifting to a calm, steady blue. The ship hummed around them, a living thing carrying them forward into uncertainty. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lyra was not facing that uncertainty alone. The stars streamed past the viewport, countless points of light against the infinite darkness. Somewhere among them lay Lyra's future, unknown, unpredictable, but rich with possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine during her years of self-imposed exile. And it had all begun with a crash, a statement of fear, and a simple, unexpected smile.